All right, let me throw this stuff up. All right, here we go. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Cafe BTW, a morning gaming podcast. I am actually really excited because it's another Saturday morning and I'm sort of awake because I'm drinking lots of coffee right now. But I have a returning guest, which has, we've had a few returning guests, but I'm really happy to have Brian here, Brian Riggsbee, who was actually on the show to talk about his Rygar book. And Brian, I really appreciate you coming back on the show to talk about your next book, which is Video Game Maps. Welcome back, man.
Thanks so much. It's good to be back with you.
How are you?
Like I was telling you before we started, a little sick, so I'll try to keep my energy up, but otherwise, all is well.
That's great, and I'm sorry that you're feeling a little sick today. But I do want to let's get right into things, and just to kind of reiterate, we had you on the show. I think we were trying to figure out it was probably a little under a year ago. So a lot's sort of changed. I think the last time we talked, the pandemic was very much in motion. People were working remote, and now I think things are coming out a little bit, but people are still working remote. But how has things been just in general from that standpoint since we've last spoken?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic is a good time to write a book. So, timing worked out pretty well there. Doing a lot of things from home still. My wife and I, we have a toddler, so we still, mostly our lives just kind of surround around keeping him alive and entertained. And I work full time remotely as well. So I have the freedom to, stay at home, especially when things are surging. And so we've been pretty lucky there. As far as we know, none of us have had COVID yet.
Ooh,
We've
you're the
only
lucky
been
one.
tested like 20 times. So we think we haven't had it yet.
You are the lucky one. Well, cool, man. Well, we did originally uh, ask you this question. I asked all my guests this question is to let's backtrack and time travel a little bit. Let's go back into little Brian's existence when you were a kid. If you could tell me, because you're obviously an author, and we're going to get into that, and you deal with a lot of things around video games. What was it about growing up that connected you to video games? What's a cool story you could share with us that really sparked your interest as a in your younger days?
Yeah, so I mean, the first time I think I saw a video game was at a neighbor's house and they were playing Atari. And I was so young, I barely had any idea what was going on. I think they were playing like some kind of game like a Galaga-like game or something like that. And um, I was immediately like begging my mother for us to get it. And we eventually got one. And the games weren't that great. I mean, I know some people have like a strong connection to some of those games, but it wasn't really until the NES came out that again, a different neighbor had it. He said, "Come on in, like you got to see this thing." He was playing Super Mario Brothers. His dad was playing most of it because he had the skill and dexterity to really actually advance in the game. And that's when I really got hooked. So we got an NES. Over the years, I think we only owned like 10 games, but as it was at the time, you have a network of friends, they have a few games that you don't have, you kind of trade them around. That's really how I got hooked. And then, of course, I played modern games thereafter, but I always revisited the NES because of the time in my life when I was hooked into it, but also like it really is a great system. Plenty of bad games, but so many good ones. And so I always go back to the NES. I have a huge collection now that, I bought, a decade ago, 20 years ago, like every time I revisit it. And still haven't got a PS5. So I have to spend more time in retro gaming, I think. Maybe one day I'll get one of those too.
So yeah, do you have what is your collection like? I guess I never asked you that before. Do you have? It sounds like you have a bunch of NES games, but
Oh,
what can
yeah.
you
I
tell me
mean,
about that?
you know how it is like, well, thankfully, like before the retro gaming collection surge started to hit, maybe like 8 or so years ago, I collected a lot. Like a lot of us, went on eBay and whatnot or local stores. And I picked up, some, complete in box like Famicom games just because the artwork is so beautiful and it looks incredible on a shelf, and just kind of holding it and soaking it in just feels good. It just does. And so, yeah, I got lots of NES games. I mean, other than that, I just have some kind of obscure things. Like I really like the Shining Force series, so I started kind of collecting those, and then realized I'm not going to get all of those. So I'm not going to have the money to spend on those.
Those are getting
They've
pricey,
gotten
man.
ridiculous. They got way out of
Well, they
control.
have Shining Force 3 on the Saturn, which is one I've been trying to. I don't have, and that one's just really expensive.
So I have a horrible story to tell you about that. I can tell you
Please
real
tell
quick.
me.
So uh, this was maybe like 20 years ago, I'd say 15 years ago. I can't even remember, but I bought a Saturn off of eBay just to play Shining Force. And I bought Shining Force, and back then it was not that bad.
Right.
And I played it, and I think this is one that had like multiple parts to it, I think, but I might have only played the first one. I can't really remember, but and then I finished it, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do with this thing? And I resold it on eBay, and at the time, I think I made like $5 extra from what I paid for it, and thought that was such a victory. And now it's worth like 20x that I
Oh
had
my
purchased it
god.
for, and I think it's my biggest regret. Second to, I sold my Genesis and all my games back in the day when I thought I was too grown up to have those things anymore, and I was a fool to think that.
Well, you're not alone because, well, partial of my childhood collection my mom threw out when I was in college, but I actually was going through a rough time and I had to sell like half of my collection, like maybe like 10 years ago. And I regret like that because I had like a bunch of great stuff. And luckily I didn't sell any of my Saturn games. But Shining Force 3 is like a game I've been looking for, and hopefully one day I'll be able to get for an affordable price, but that probably won't happen either. Um, Speaking of that, before we get into the topic at hand, I did want to bring up a couple of things. You actually work at Slack, which I think is really important to mention because Slack has been such a huge part of what we've been doing in a day to day in a workforce. And I thought it'd be cool just to mention, like, what do you do at Slack, Brian? And what is it like working for a product that's become so crucial for the workforce around, especially the pandemic right now?
Yeah, so I've been at Slack for a little over 6 years. It's been a long time. I'm a director of technical program management. I work with product and engineering. I've worked with so many different teams there. And yeah, I mean, it is like at Slack, we use Slack. Almost 100% of our day is using Slack to, coordinate with each other, to test out the product itself. That's like where our work gets done. And I've been, working from home like many people in technology have been for the last couple of years. And, Slack has enabled us to basically work the same way we used to. And, we're a digital first company. So we make sure that, the work that we do works in a digital environment. And yeah, I mean, it's been great. And as far as like working there and just like when I talk to people, and even 6 years ago, when Slack was still relatively new, not brand new, but still pretty new, I could say, hey, like someone's like, oh, where do you work? I work at Slack. And I'm prepared to explain what it is. And they're like, no, I know what it is. I use it. And over again, people kept telling me they use it and they love it. And honestly, that is like what feels really good about working for this company.
Yeah, that's interesting. You probably had to explain what it is before the pandemic, and now you probably don't have to even, everyone knows what Slack is now.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so thanks for your contributions, man, because it keeps me going at work, and I think I got Jan in chat said Slack major gamer interview. What's up, Jan? Good to see you. But yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting that you work there, and yeah, thanks for keeping our work lives together with a really good app. It's become very, very useful, and I like it. And I got to be honest with you, though, the notification sound of a Slack, like the default one,
Yeah.
that kind of scares me. It reminds me that my boss is hitting me up in a DM or something. So it always like makes my eyes like light up because it could be either my boss wants to ask me something or it could be just a general thing from a colleague. But it always freaks me out. It's like it always reminds me of like, oh shoot, what am I getting here?
Oh,
So
I know what you mean. I leave my sounds off, but that's also because I'm like stuck on my computer all day. So you can get away with it if you're staring at the screen all day too. But
well, when I'm remote though, I'm like stepping away from my desk just to get like
totally.
away, but I leave the sound on purpose so that if
Okay, okay.
Like, not to say anything, but sometimes I just want to like lay down in my bed for like a hot minute, and then if I hear the Slack go, whatever the notification is, I'm like, oh, okay, I better get back to work. Yeah. I hope my bosses are watching.
I was gonna say.
Jan says, I think the default notification sound also scared me. It's been a while since I used it, but I think it reminded me of a tool breaking in Minecraft. Oh, that's a great way to describe it. I love that. Brian, before we get into the topic at hand, and I have a ton of questions about writing books, being an author, I do like to talk about a current event on the podcast, and I just wanted to throw it out there. What do you know about graded games in the video game world? Have you heard that there's a lot of controversy because something?
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what is your thoughts about grading a video game and sealing it away? Like, what do you think of that?
I mean, I have so many thoughts. I mean, first of all, if you're going to seal something, it's never to be played again. It's never to be touched and cherished in the way that I think a lot of collectors do. And that's fine. I think some people want to do that. Maybe they have 2 copies of things. Maybe they have a perfect copy of something. They just want it to be perfectly sealed. That's great. I mean, as far as like the grade itself, the price, that's all 100% subjective. This is an organization that just gets to decide, right? Like people have to put faith into a company and their opinion, right? So like, I mean, and before you even get into controversy, that's just putting that out there, right? I also think that, the whole process, like this same with like, the comic book grading and everything, I know it's become extremely convoluted. Like if you want to get like a comic book grade or whatever, it's like, well, it used to take a month. Now it takes a membership. Now it takes many months. Now you got to pay all this extra. It all sounds crazy to me. Like if it's not that accessible, I don't think it's very worthwhile. You're also cutting a lot of people out by doing that, right? And then when I saw the headlines, whatever, many months ago about, was it Mario 64? I think that sold for like, was it like 300 grand or something, or was graded at like, well, what was that one? Do you remember?
There was like a bunch. There was like a Mario Brothers sold for like 2 million as a graded.
Oh God.
Like a freaking Madden game for the Genesis sold for $500,000. And
see, this is crazy because we know these games are not that rare. No. Like this is crazy.
That's why there's this lawsuit. So there's been a lot of controversy on one of the particular grading companies called wadagames, right? Wadagames is very new too. They only came out around like 2016 or maybe 2018. I'm sorry. And they're like, we're coming into the grading game market. And they became pretty popular, but the problem with wadagames is they'll grade anything you send them. You could send them a bootleg game and they'll grade it. You could send them a loose game and they'll grade it. It's really subjective, like you said. Who are these people and why do they have the right to judge what a game's value is, right? So there's been a lot of manipulation with auction houses, Brian, and manipulation of the market and racketeering. And finally, there's a lawsuit going against wadagames and filed in the Central District Court of California, a class action lawsuit on behalf of these gentlemen named Jacob Knight, Jack Cribbs, and Jason Dose, as well as other potential individuals. They accused wadagames and Owner Collectors Universe of pumping up a bubble around retro game collecting, misleading customers, and a pattern of racketeering activity. I 100% agree with this. And it's not that I don't have a problem with graded games. I personally don't believe in it. But when you're kind of single-handedly working toe-to-toe with an auction house and like manipulating the market on these prices that don't make any sense. Oh, thanks for the new follow, Coach. Really appreciate it. It just doesn't make any sense. So I'm glad that there's something going on, that someone's looking at this, and I'm just going to keep my eye on it. I don't know what's going to happen from this court case and this lawsuit, but we don't need to see a Madden game sell for $500,000. Or what was really weird is that why is a Super Mario game selling for $2 million? That means my loose copy of Super Mario Brothers should be worth like 20 grand, right?
Right,
but it's not.
At least.
But it's not. It's worth like, I don't know, $30 maybe. It's
right.
not. So there's such a problem in the market. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that I'm not happy about it. I've spoken very much in detail with another influencer here named Retro Gaming Dad or Retro Dad, and we talked about price manipulation in the market. So I had to bring it up. And then just one other thing. There's a friend of mine on TikTok named Galvers, and he's going through a tough time. And there's a campaign right now that's going around TikTok to support him. So I will be sharing a link to where you could donate and support this gentleman. But I did want to mention that I believe he lost his wife, just out of nowhere. She passed away. And it's like very sudden, and he's going through a lot of problems. He has kids. So as a retro gaming community, leader myself, I do want to shout him out and send my best and hope for the best for him. And I will share the link later at a later time, but just wanted to mention quickly. So his name is, if you want to check out his TikTok, I'm going to put it in chat. It's Galvris, and just sending him my best. But Jan says, finally a lawsuit, but probably those actually responsible won't be held accountable or significant consequences. The rich get away with everything these days because they are worshipped. I guess that's true, Jan. That's very true. But Brian, let's get into the topic at hand, okay? Before we get into video game maps, let's backtrack. You wrote a book about Rygar. What is this all about? And also, give me a little bit of background on dangerforce.com, which is your retro gaming, I guess, literature.
Oh man, I'm like, how do I truncate this story? So Danger Force was the name of the Counter-Strike clan that I was a member of. So I played way too much Counter-Strike for way too many years. I registered the URL. I tried to get the guys to use the website, and like we didn't end up using it for anything. And so I just started using it as my personal site. I never got rid of it. I have so many different URLs I own. They all just kind of reroute here. Maybe one day I'll actually clean it up. It just became my portfolio. Funny story is that a random person emailed me once and tried to purchase the URL from me of something like a few years ago, or maybe 3 years ago.
Okay.
And they said they couldn't reveal their client. And I was like, I don't want to get rid of it. And they tried to offer me a little more. It didn't seem like that much or enough. And then lo and behold, a new show came out on Disney called Danger Force. And so I realized they were the ones trying to purchase the URL. And so maybe I get a little bit of traffic from people looking for that kids show. And I don't know how well that will work for me, but great. So that's the Danger Force thing. The Rygar thing. Yeah, we talked about it last time. It's the history of the entire series. So a lot of people think of Rygar as either the arcade or the NES game. Those are probably the two that stand out. But it is a series that spans something like a dozen games. But I try to take it even farther than writing about the history of those games, and also, wrote a little bit about, Tecmo. Also included 50 different artists. So their fan art, some of them supplied multiple images. Really cool gallery of artwork there. And then I talked about different mods people have worked on. I interviewed some speedrunners, just all kinds of content. I even added like some kind of fun games at the end, like all kinds of good stuff. So it'd just be this really complete book on the series and really just celebrate Rygar. I am someone who, played the arcade game. We had a burger joint that had it. I had the NES game that I was, pretty obsessed with. The other games I had to play later. I actually did play the PS2 game when it came out, which was an interesting take. 3D. It was something that was influential, clearly, of God of War. It's hard to deny that. It was just, I wanted to tackle something no one had written about yet. I didn't care if it was going to be very niche. I know Rygar is not like the most popular like IP, but I think it has a huge fan base. I think it has like a lot of people that are very nostalgic for it. And some of the games still hold up actually quite well too. And so, that's what I worked on then. And I've reprinted it a few times because I'm continuing to get sales on it. And when I sell it, I give people a few stickers, one of which I made.
I still have all the
poster.
You sent me a nice package before we did it. And I still have all those cool things that you sent me. So thank you.
Yeah, you can see there in the collage right there. Yeah,
dude, it's
so it's got a little bit of everything in there.
So you created this Rygar book, and then you created this brand new book called Video Game Maps, NES and Famicom. So Before we get into that, though, I want to backtrack a little bit, Brian. What the hell is a map, just in general? In your definition, what is a map, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about it in the preface of the book because I think it was important to have a distinction. And there are a lot of definitions, and that's fine. And I think they're all valid. And I think
What's up,
when it
Sammy?
comes to video game maps in particular, I think a lot of us think of like level design as a map, right? Like just seeing an entire level, just like copy and pasted screenshots on a page, right? And I tried to keep those out for the most part because I felt like while it's valid, I think it's a fair distinction to say that like the design of the level, the actual layout of the level is like a map, right? You're navigating through the space, right? Like a map. I wanted to try to highlight more of like the more traditional maps, right? Like be more like a cartographer, right? Like the top-down maps, the cutout maps, like the side view cutout maps, the interactive maps, or maybe just the maps that you only see, like the ones like sometimes the character is moving on, but sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes it's just a reference point. Sometimes it's in the pause screen. Sometimes it's in the manual, right? I also try to include a lot of hand-drawn maps because, traditional maps are hand-drawn, and I think that's where a lot of the beauty comes from. A lot of these magazines had a lot of beautiful hand-drawn maps, especially the Japanese ones. And then, a lot of fan art created maps as well, like as you see there with that Zelda one. And so for me, it's really like it's a space that depicts, an area that can be navigated through, that breathes some like lore, adds to like the depth and the quality of the game itself. Because we're not just talking about a map in the traditional sense. We're talking about a map for a game. Like it has to mean something for the game itself.
Yeah, and I think that maps are definitely something that are very much a part of video games, and very much a part of the modern game. Most games that have open worlds or are at least 3D platformers have maps, and or some sort of area on the game that shows you where your character is in relative to where you are in the video game space. I'm always fascinated by maps because I think about like the maps that existed in the 1700s and what these cartographers, which is someone that creates a map. And we talked about this off the show, and I think it's interesting to mention, what is that like to be a real like cartographer that actually like sits there and figures that out? And like, how did they figure that out back in the old days when we didn't have satellites and imagery? Like, how did they know how to draw a map? I don't understand. Like, no,
Well, I mean,
I
that
don't
is
get
why
it.
Some of them are not super accurate, right? When you look
Very
back,
inaccurate, right?
there are some inaccuracies. So, I mean, they did have some problems. But yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's a modern game that you mentioned. Like, if you didn't have a map in a large, like an open world game, like people would be like, they'd be so confused. Like, you could not create a large game these days without a map. But back in the day, it was like, maybe the manual had it, maybe it didn't. I mean, speaking of inaccuracies, sometimes NES games had maps that weren't even all that accurate. They're more like, oh, here's a simple flow chart. This will get you started, but we're only going to give you the first third of the game. Good luck, right?
Right.
And sometimes that's like enticing and fun, because they wanted you to maybe draw it yourself, which I think is they wanted you to be a cartographer, which I think is super cool.
Yeah, and I have these people here, and I'm just showing them. I don't know any of these people because I'm not very familiar with cartographers, but this is like a list of some of the greatest cartographers that ever existed. I think Amerigo Vespucci is one I know and I've heard of before. And he was making maps in the 1400s, Brian. Like, I wish I could have him on the show to ask him, but that's quite a long time ago. So I don't know. I wish we had a time machine. Jan says, I also have always been impressed with hand-drawn maps. Jenza says, LL, imagine a game where a cartographer is part of the game. Like, you start with a bad map, and as you progress and explore, you make it better. That sounds like a good video game, Genzo. That sounds like a really good video
I
game.
like that. I like that. I mean, it reminds me a little bit of like, in a lot of modern games and some older ones, when they have the fog of war feature, when you enter a new area, it starts to slowly expose itself and draw itself in because, you don't want it to be given away. You want to enjoy it. But Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen one where you actually get to draw it yourself.
That's a
Maybe
great
I don't
idea,
know.
Genzo. I mean, that's a really good idea. Um, a game about a cartographer that has to, each level is trying to create a map, and you actually, I don't know how fun that would be, but maybe you could turn it into a video game. um,
I think you have something there. I think you could do something there.
Maps are highly inaccurate, Genzo says. Let's talk about the cover here. So this is the cover. And maybe I'm jumping a little ahead. Let's start first. So when I interviewed you with the Rygar book, when did you say, you know what, I got to make a book about video game maps? And how did you get to concept to paper? Like, how did that even start?
Oh, wow. So, I mean, I was trying to think of what to do next. I made a pretty big list of things. I knew I wanted to do something a little less niche than Rygar. But I also wanted to do what I did last time, which is create something not just for an audience, but for myself. Like, I only want to make things that I also enjoy. So for me, I wanted to be able to have something where I can sit down with it one day and just flip through it myself and be like, oh, this is so great. Obviously, putting it all together is a lot of work. So it's a little harder to just sit down and enjoy it after you spend countless hours doing it all. But, I had never, like, I've seen old NES books, like there's like the Atlas and like other books where they say, like, like here's some, it's more of like a strategy guide, right? And they have
Right.
maps in it as a result of it being a strategy guide, but like never something that just kind of celebrated the joy of just the maps. And I think that speaks to the time period, right? Like we didn't need a gallery of NES maps, 25 years ago, right? It's like, no, it's like I play the game, I focus on the game, I need the strategy, that's all I need. So to me, this felt like the right time. It felt like the right space. And, I just, like last time, I thought I was going to start small, maybe like 30 games. And then I just said, like, why not just throw in literally as many as I can? I did cut like
And you do
20,
have,
20, 25 games eventually.
do you know how many by number you have here? I mean,
Yeah, it's like slightly over 250. So
holy
it's
crap,
it's
bro.
quite large. And that's so 250 games, which means there's, more maps than that.
That's freaking awesome. I'm impressed. And you put this together pretty quickly. How did you do that? That's really
I
amazing.
I don't know. I get obsessed with things. It can sometimes be a little unhealthy, to be honest.
That is amazing, dude. So okay, so I do see like one thing that's interesting is how does a video game developer go from I guess paper to screen? Like you put here I think you have it as a title, right? Where is it? Yeah, from paper to screen. Like how does that process work in a video game from what you've learned from a lot of your research here?
Well, I mean, it really depends, because these maps are all super different, right? Like some of them are calling on, different things, different games in history, right? Like so obviously Advanced Dungeons and Dragons like predates the NES, right? So they're calling on a lot of like material from the past. A lot of these things just start as hand-drawn maps. I mean, if not all of them, right? Like that's just the way we used to do things back in the day, right? If we didn't have something to reference specifically. Some maps, you'll notice there's some themes where there's a lot that look eerily similar to, the world we live on, Earth. So a lot of people, of course, are pulling from familiar spaces. But it's very much gridded out, right? Like, I mean, as we know, it's like everything's pixelated, right? So everything kind of fits in a nice grid. When you think about like RPGs, like top-down RPGs, like Dragon Warrior, Final Fantasy, etc., right? Like everything moves like left, right, up, down, right? So everything's gridded out. A lot of things were drawn on grid paper. It's actually why in the bundle I created, I included a custom notebook. It's a 144 page dot grid notebook. Dot grid is the one I personally like to just kind of draw in for fun. And that way, if people want to go back and still draw their own maps, even of modern games, I don't know if you would want to, but probably retro games, you can do that. You can kind of play around with the way things used to be.
Yeah, and everyone in chat, you'll see rotating is Brian's links. You could check out Danger Force, the Rygar book, and check out all the books here. I know it's sold out, right, Brian? The book is sold out right now.
Yeah, it is sold out. However, I did add an email sign up at the bottom of that page, so that I'm getting At first, I thought, yeah, maybe I'll restock it. I'm getting hit up left and right for people that want me to restock it. So I feel like I would be bad person if I did not do that. So you sign up for that email list or follow me on Twitter or whatever you want to do. It's and I'll let you know as soon as I'm ready to do that. Maybe I'll just do a like pre-order this time, and that way everyone that wants one, as long as they sign up in that short window of time, they can secure their
I would
copy.
love one. This is like one that I would love on my shelf. This is like a really beautiful looking book, man.
Yeah,
Um,
and the cover is by Phil Summers. I'm sure a lot of people might recognize it as hand drawn game guides. He's you might recognize some of his artwork there. I commissioned him for this. He's a super awesome guy. I would be embarrassed to show you the napkin drawing I did when he was like, "Well, what do you want?" And I sent him like this horrible drawing that he turned into this beautiful
yeah,
drawing.
it's really beautiful, man. I love the colors too. I love the
Oh yeah,
sky.
and I didn't
Beautiful.
give him any color direction. Like I was just like, there's some people standing on a cliff pointing at a castle. They're looking over a map. I gave him like 8 different ideas, and that's the one he picked. And he came up with the logo also. Like he's smart, he put the maps as the biggest text because that's what's most important there, and he hand drew that part of it. I think it's beautiful,
I think
and
it's awesome, man. I'm
yeah, I think it's
impressed.
cool.
Beautiful cover, beautiful book. It's the type of book you'd want on the shelf. Manny says a book about video game maps sounds very interesting. Absolutely. A really good topic for a book. So let's get into a few interesting references of games and their maps. First up is, which we talked about, you said Castlevania. So what is some interesting things you could highlight here on a game like Castlevania, for instance, that you featured in the book?
Yeah, Castlevania. The map it's amazing, right? Because first of all, you would see this side view of the map itself. It has a compass of a sort, right? Like it highlights the block or the level that you're entering. Doesn't sound like a novel idea, but it was fairly novel at the time. You'd also see the character kind of walking past the map, so it almost made it feel kind of like rich and like had this depth to it. But also like it's realistic. When you every time you zoom into the game, like you're in the level, and then you zoom back out to the map, you realize you're really navigating through this castle. Like it is actually laid out as the map is. And I'm talking about the original Castlevania, of course. So it's really cool, like dynamic where the map itself doesn't do anything for the gameplay, right? Like it's all supplemental, but it makes you really feel like you are battling your way through this castle. You're moving up, down, you're dropping into the catacombs, you're working your way back up, right? It all actually exists in the world space. And it existed in the game, as you see here. It existed in the manuals as well. And yeah, it's just like it just makes it feel so much more deep.
Yeah, it's really. I think Castlevania is a really good. It's actually really cool. It's well, first of all, a great game and an interesting point of view from yourself. Sanity says my OCD to clear all the pixels on X on maps is problematic.
Oh, yes, same. If I think I know what you're saying, like especially in a game where you're filling in the fog of war of a map, like I cannot like Breath of the Wild. If I didn't touch every little every little piece of that map, I would go insane.
For me, like I played a lot of Diablo, and with Diablo, you don't see the map unless you get to the area and it starts to unlock.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be obsessed with the dungeon levels and making sure that I could see everything on the map before I move on to the next dungeon. And that was very OCD for me. So very good point, Sanity. There's a lot of OCD involved in map and exploring. So let's another one we're queued up is Shadowgate. You said that there's some interesting perspectives here. So what's interesting about Shadowgate?
Yeah, so Shadowgate does not have an in-game map. That little tile at the very top, that's a couple page from yeah, right there is from Nintendo Power. So it didn't get it didn't have a map, but it's actually a pretty complex game as far as like the network you navigate. In the early stages or the early spaces, you kind of backtrack a little bit as you try to figure out where to use your item next. And it starts to become a little more linear later, if memory serves me correctly. So like you don't get too lost, but this hand-drawn map, that's featured here. So this is not an official original work. This is a more modern hand-drawn map that an artist featured.
That's
I
cool.
think it's incredible. Like, I mean, can you imagine if this was in the game? If this was what was unlocking as you were navigating through it, something like this. I think it's just totally beautiful.
That's awesome. And first time chatter, RT, what's up? And RT says maps are so good as tools for driving gameplay and exploration. Absolutely. So this is an example of a game that didn't have a map, that probably should have had a map, and then someone later came in and created this awesome map. This is really beautiful, actually. I love the art too. I even like the black and white.
Oh yeah, I think black and white's perfect for this.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and that's from a Japanese magazine right there. So
So you're saying that's an interesting thing. It's like some games didn't have maps, but yet literature and video game magazines drew up maps to show you how these games looked. That's also a thing, right? Like,
yeah, the magazines really filled in the gaps, right? Because sometimes the manuals had a little bit of a map in there, maybe a partial map. Sometimes the games had something. But yeah, when they didn't, the magazines really, that's where we got a lot of it from. And so many of them were hand drawn. Sometimes you'd also see like literally like photographs of a TV screen stitched together to form what
a map.
basically is a map, right? Which is still extremely helpful. The hand drawn ones are personally my favorites. A lot of things you can tell are like drawn with like, like penciled first and then hit up with markers and then, maybe inked a little bit. The Japanese ones in my research, like they tended to have a little more of the hand drawn maps than we had in things like Nintendo Power. But we did have quite a few. I think we had quite a few in the States. But yeah.
Speaking of Japanese maps, you told me that Contra is an interesting one to pull up. What was the background on Contra? Because you mentioned to me, which I didn't realize, the US version of Contra did not have a map, yet the Japanese version did. And why the hell was that? And what's kind of the little fun facts about this one?
So a lot of people, and some people know this, but here in the West, we didn't have the map. There was also an intro cinematic with some really cool sprite work of the main characters, and like I think like you see like the planet Earth and like some stuff that actually sets the context for the game, the actual alien invasion and all that stuff. So we were missing all that as well. The map, as you see here, you'll see this in a couple of games actually, where you'll see a traditional top down view, topographical map, and then you'll see like the side view as well. And this is only one image that I included there, but if people look it up, you'll see that as you advance through the stages, it would actually usher you farther to the right, so you could actually see more and more of the side view. And again, I mean, like Castlevania, it's not necessary. It's not required, right? Like people love Contra. Like people played Contra in the States. They still think it's one of the top 10 games in the NES, I'm sure. But I mean, I think the intro cinematic and the map would have made them love it a little bit more. And like, it's just so cool to say, I know where I am right now. I can see, okay, am I on an island? There's some water on the left. Okay, but I know I'm isolated. I'm dropping in somewhere. I can only move to the right. And I can see that looking ahead, I'm going to be moving my way up. So you also have this moment of anticipation, which I think is really, really cool as well, right? Like, oh, am I going to climb that waterfall? Am I going to like go into this snowy area? Like what's ahead of me, right? That actually brings a lot of joy to the game as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And Contra's a beloved game, but it's interesting with side scrollers and maps, You still need a map and a side scroller. And it's interesting that as a kid, and Sanity mentions here, I remember a lot of the strategy guides back in the day totally just had screenshots stitched together, which created maps, technically. And then backtracking a little bit to probably one of the most popular mapped early NES games that really encompasses exploration and the ability to see a map, or at least follow through on a map. And this is a good example of guides and strategy guides showing you the full game. But what is kind of like some fun little tidbits of Legend of Zelda?
Yeah. So, I mean, as you see on the screen there, as many people are familiar with, the fold out map that came with the game, it was only partially illustrated, right? Which was a lot of people filled in those bubbles, those 4x3 bubbles, drawing their own maps in. So they kind of got you started, which I thought was really cool. When I played Zelda, I didn't own it. My neighbor did. He didn't have like, a lot of kids are, like we lose stuff, we give stuff away, things get thrown out. The game remained, but I actually didn't even see this map until many years later, which is kind of unfortunate. So we did this thing that was, so if you remember in the game, there's this gray rectangle in the corner and it shows you a dot. So it acts as a compass. So it tells you your relative position, but it doesn't draw anything here. And we literally would look straight at the screen as best as we could. And we took a little like non-permanent marker and we would dot somewhere and say like, we're going to go back there later. But if you turned your head a little bit, it actually wasn't even the right spot. So it was this really archaic way of trying to like mark locations and try to remember what to do next. And as a lot of us did when you played a single player game with two people, you pass the controller back and forth. One person in that sense is the cartographer. Probably would have done better drawing the map in that instance. But I mean, we had a marker and we used it and that's the best we could do. But yeah, I mean, Zelda had, complete maps, of course, they published as well and all kinds of guides. In Japan, there was like dozens of guides that were produced for the original Legend of Zelda with more than just maps, but literally like, this is how you go from level 2 to 3. And this is what you should do between 2 to 3, like really, really in-depth stuff. It's been talked to death about because there's so much to say about it. And, the map is, I think, what really stands out, even though there wasn't an in-game map, the fold-out maps and the strategy guide maps, and then just the beauty of like how it all connected, I think still is like what people think about.
Yeah, this is like definitely a game as a kid that also eventually your brain becomes a map where you're able to visualize the map in your head while you're playing it. And it takes some time and practice when you're playing a game, but I remember as a kid, like, you eventually know where to go. And I love that. I love when you learn the game without using the map and you kind of visualize and know where to go. I used to play a lot of Destiny. Destiny is a good example of a really cool, like each level had a map. You could kind of do an open world. And I remember I kind of like eventually just memorized everything and I knew where things were. And there's something like really special when you finally click when you're playing a game where you don't necessarily need a map anymore, but it's all like categorized in inside your brain. Sandy says Zelda 2's Last Temple was a nightmare without a map. Yes, absolutely. I had Destiny totally memorized. Yep, it's one game I could literally pick out and say I eventually just memorized the whole levels. I knew where to go, and there's something special about that. It's like you really feel like you're connected to the game once you feel like you don't need a map. And I'm pretty good in real life. I don't know how you are with directions, Brian. If I go to a place once, if I drive to a place once, I usually can remember how to get there. That's usually something that a skill I have. I don't drive anymore, actually. I don't have a car, but I used to. Wow. When I used to drive. I know
what you mean, because the Destiny example and the driving example, it's like maps can actually slow you down, right? Because you're going to process information faster in your brain. You're staring, you don't want to like look down. You don't want to have to write something. Like there is also something to be said about that. I think that's an important point. I used to deliver pizzas way back in the day. So like we had one map at the pizza place. And if you weren't first on shift, you don't even get the map. So you had to know where you're going, like that. Your map is in your brain. You have to know where you're going. And yeah, it totally makes sense to me.
Yeah. And that's a good point too. I'm a part of the generation, Sandy brings up GPS and how GPS has ruined people in the sense that their skills of learning directions is kind of gone out the window because instant gratification, just plugging something in and knowing where to go. But I was a part of the generation that didn't have GPS. And like, we had to use things like, I forget what it's called, the map that you could use to find directions. What are they called? There's a name for it, but I'm blanking. Do you know what I'm talking about?
It sounds like you might be talking about the thing that we had at the pizza place. So our thing was like, you had to look up the street name in an index, and then it would tell you in a grid. It would be like B7.
Yes. What is that called?
And you go to I don't remember, but you go to well, first of all, you got to go to page 230 and then look for B7 or whatever.
And it would give you like
kind of like you got to trace your way from the place from A to B. It's so crazy.
No Fear says Rand McNally Big Map was what I used in New York City. It's an
Mm.
atlas, but there's a name for it, and I forget the goddamn name because when I moved out to LA, Brian, before GPS kind of came out, I was using that grid to get around because I was a runner. I would deliver things
Oh,
for
okay.
studios and stuff. And GPS was out, but it was like $500 for a
Hmm.
GPS, or $1,000. I think was the first time when the GPS came out. A Thomas Guide, woo! There it is.
That's it. That
That's
is
it.
definitely it.
The Thomas Guide is definitely kind of like what helped us find and get places. Where is it?
I would
Thomas.
have loved to have had a smartphone though while I was delivering pizzas. As much as I love maps,
It would have
I would
made
have
your life
gladly
so much
taken the
easier.
GPS. I would have taken it.
It would have, and here it is. This is a
I
Thomas Guide.
mean, this is a time where like if you get lost, you got to go find a payphone and call the pizza place, and then they'll tell you where to go. So
Yeah, I had
yeah.
to believe it or not, when I moved to LA and I first moved here, I had a Thomas Guide in my car. And then I eventually spent $400 on a GPS that eventually got stolen from my car because back then, if you left your GPS in, like, I didn't think about it, but back then you would keep your GPS on the suction thing on your windshield.
Hmm.
But someone literally broke my window, grabbed that thing, because back then those GPSs were like $400, $300. So I still remember getting that robbed. And then I had another one stolen. So I had two of them stolen.
Wow.
It
And
was
now it's in your pocket and
now
in
it's just like
everyone's pocket.
it's everywhere. What would we do without GPS? It's just really insane. Another, as we're kind of nearing towards the end and the back nine, haha, get it, golf, back nine of the show. Golf is already a sport that involves mapping and beautiful courses, because every time you go to play golf, you have already a course. And then what's really interesting is that it relates to video games in my eye, because you have a strategy guide when you go golfing, because the course gives you a map that you could look at, and it shows you every course, how long it is, and where things are in the distance. But so it's just really interesting that this is NES Open, which in my opinion is one of the best golf games ever made on the NES, and single-handedly probably still one of the best simulation golf games. But let's talk about the beauty of converting a golf map to a golf video game. It just goes hand in hand. It's perfect. And look how beautiful it is.
I know it's so cool. It almost makes me wish there was like an adventure RPG game like tied in with a map like that too. It's like it just looks like something you want to explore.
Right? It's perfect. And I think golf maps, especially golf video game maps, are really cool. And this is NES Open has 3 courses. You could play the US course, you could play the Japanese course, and then you could play the UK course. But all the courses have really interesting designs. And I remember the first thing I do immediately when you get to choosing your club before you tee off is you're looking at the map. So this is the type of game that really drives map usage. I mean, every single hole, there's video games that have maps that you're not always looking at the map, but in golf, you have to use the map every time you're playing it, no matter where you are. Every time you hit the ball, you got to look at the map, you got to see your distance and see how far you are. Have you ever played golf in real life, Brian?
Okay, so I've done a driving range once and my back was destroyed the next day. I've played real golf once, although I think we only got like 4 holes in because none of us knew what we were doing. And it probably took us way too long to get that far. And we were holding up people and we felt bad about it. And that was kind of a while ago. I play mini golf. I know that doesn't count, but it is still fun.
I guess mini golf, though, some mini golf courses have maps because they show you like all the holes that you got to hit, and
Yeah.
you're still mapping with a mini golf course. It's just
I've played Hot Shots Golf. I
ooh,
think that's
good
what it was
game.
called.
Yeah,
Was it PlayStation 2 maybe?
Xbox and PlayStation 2.
Yeah, that was really fun actually.
Very, very good game. I actually have that. That's a very good golf game as well. Fun too. And then I used to play a lot of the Tiger Woods games when they were like going through their heyday. But yeah, it's and they're beautiful. Like the courses of maps are beautiful, and it's an old man game. It's a game that's been around for a very long time, and maps are a very important part. And also, if you haven't played NES Open and you like golf games, absolutely, this golf game is on the NES. It has everything you need in a simulation golf game, and it's one of the best out there. So if you don't have it, it's very affordable. It's only like $10 for the NES cart these days. So it's actually a game you could get.
How much is it sealed at 9.8? Do you know?
9.8 WADA, probably like $3 million. Because that's what would happen with WADA. Sandy says, mini golf is good for short game. I used to play outlaw golf. Yeah. And I did want to mention, I know it's... when you're thinking of like the size of video games, I found a really interesting thing. It's like, what are the games that have the largest miles of terrain in them, right? And I thought this would be interesting to walk through. Like open world games, for instance, how many miles do they have within them? For instance, Assassin's Creed's Black Flag has spans 55 square miles. Okay,
Wow.
and then World of Warcraft spans about, let's see, what is World of Warcraft? 80 square miles in a video game. Another one, DayZ, which is a game I used to play, 86 square miles. Arma 3, which is a kind of like simulation army game for the computer, 104 square miles. And then if you move up, mileage starts to increase on games like Final Fantasy 15, which in my opinion was a very good Final Fantasy game, and sort of open world, is 750 square miles, Brian. That's a lot.
That's insane.
That's insane when you think about. I know your book was focused on a lot of NES maps, but imagine, obviously for these games that have large square miles, there's maps that are being made. So what do you think about like the modern mapping in video games and how it's progressed and grown over the course of
I mean, in the Final Fantasy 15 example, I don't envy the people that had to like lay all that out and figure that all out. I think there was a point where we started to, in game development, where we started to create games that were bigger and bigger, right? And I'm thinking about like San Andreas, for example, where we decided to just add a lot of extra space because we could. And I actually think it was at the time a bit of a detriment to the game because it created a lot of empty space. Like it was bigger and wider, vast space, but it didn't have much to do in it. But then we kind of came back and we said, hey, we're going to keep them big and keep making them bigger, but we're going to put more content into them. And then I think that's where it kind of rounded out and things got better. Like Breath of the Wild, of course, is a great example of that, where it's like there's something to do in every little inch of that game. And so I think having more space is great. I think as long as there's something you can do there, right? Otherwise, it's going to feel tedious. You're going to get bored.
Well, funny you mentioned that. The largest game, according to this article, is No Man's Sky. And I'm going to read verbatim. The developers of No Man's Sky weren't content to give players a single galaxy to explore. They included 255 galaxies. There are so many planets to explore that it would take you almost 600 billion years
Oh my God.
to visit them. And that's what's really interesting about No Man's Sky is the game itself generates the maps automatically. Through some kind of algorithm, whatever that is. But what do you think of that? What do you think of that's where we've gotten to, that you could have a game that would take you 600 billion years? Talk about replay value. Okay.
Right. I mean, it's almost unfair though to put it in the same category, right? Because if it's computer generated, it's like it almost feels like it's you might as well just call it infinite and then have an infinite list at this point. I haven't played it yet. So I can't comment much on the game, but I think it's cool. I mean, I love the idea of like computer generated maps, even going back to games like, like Toe Jam and Earl, where it's basically a roguelike and it's different every time you play it. And so you're never really going to quite see the same thing. And so your mind never gets quite used to it. Like I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, like Star Control 2 was a game that came out and it had 500 stars and 3,800 planets to explore, and it wasn't randomly generated. So
now they're counting distance between stars though, right? Because is that fair?
I don't think it's fair. It's video game distance.
Because if you're using like hyper speed, faster than light travel or something, I don't know if that counts.
Well, here's one. Microsoft Flight Simulator is very true and realistic as a simulator game. 197 million square miles are in the game with 37,000 airports. That's pretty large.
Yeah, and you notice the trend here, right? It's like space travel and then flight,
Flight.
right? It has to be relative to the speed in which you're moving, right? If you're a little guy walking on the ground, you don't need as much space, but if you're moving really fast in the sky, of course, you just need the maps to be larger. It's all proportional. So I think the size comparison, it's interesting, right? It's like almost not quite apt because it's really more about like the ratio of like your movement speed to the terrain.
That's true. Now, a good one to mention is the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, which is known to be one of the largest mapped games in the history, not randomly generated. In Daggerfall, there's 63,000 square miles of map, and that's and any Skyrim or Elder Scrolls game relies heavily on maps, but just really interesting to get the idea of the sizes of these games. But you're
Oh,
right.
totally.
Like the ones with the biggest ones are the ones with space travel or flight simulation.
Yeah, yeah.
And just to finish off here this morning, Brian, I posted a question on Twitter. I said, what video game had the best maps? And had a bunch of people comment here. Derek says, single player would be Half-Life. The levels taking you through Black Mesa was so much fun. Also, if you get the Half-Life bots, you can play multiplayer against comp computers. I thought COD Modern Warfare 2 had a fantastic multiplayer levels. Cyberpunk 2077, which was more of a recent game. Diablo 1 from another person. Zero Tolerance from this on the Sega Mega Drive. Looks like is this Super Mario World or my
No, that's
Zelda?
Zelda.
Oh, my bad, Zelda.
Yeah.
GoldenEye multiplayer map, Shadowgate mentioned here, which is in your book.
Yeah.
Star Control 2, which we just talked about. Zelda, Dark Souls, Contra 3, Elder Ring. I got another Call of Duty Black Ops 4, Harvest Moon, Back to Nature,
Mm.
Duke Nukem 3D. Another one is Sim City, of course, very map
Oh, right.
oriented.
Make your own map.
Yeah, so really cool, and yeah,
Wow,
so good.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I always like to engage the community. So if anyone knows and follows my Twitter, you'll notice every Saturday I put a question out, and I'll usually read comments on the show as well. But Brian, God, we're nearing an hour already. It went quick. I can't believe it.
It goes fast.
Goes fast.
Yeah, maybe I should let you go. Your notification count is giving me anxiety.
My notification count?
On
Oh,
your
on my Twitter? Oh my God.
I
That's funny. My Twitter gets a lot of love these days.
I know. That's great. That's really great.
What's the future hold for you, Brian? Is there any books in the works
Oh,
that you could talk about? Like
I do have some new ideas because I'm obsessed. I think I've picked one. I'm gonna keep it secret in case I change my mind. Um, and I will, 99% chance I'll restock this one because I know people want it. The Rygar book is still available. Yeah, so I'll announce once I got that new thing ready once I have something to say about it. I need to take a little bit of a breather and kind of catch my breath, but I'll do restocking and start something new once I've caught my breath.
Awesome. And I just put the link in chat, and everyone, if you want to follow Brian, you'll see, I'm going to throw his Twitter down in chat as well. Brian, this is, and if you're new to the show and you haven't seen Brian before, he actually came on and talked about his Rygar book, and we did a whole episode about Rygar. And you could also check out that book as well. Brian, it's so awesome to have you back on and talking about this. And I know that, I'm working with the NES Pro magazine that's coming out. And
Oh, right. Yeah.
I heard that you might be featured in that as well. So we're going to be seeing a lot of your stuff coming up in some new magazines as well. So
Yeah, I'm excited for that. And I backed it, and everyone else should too. I think it's going to be really great.
yeah, and I am having 8-Bit Steve on the show in a couple of weeks to talk about NES Pro.
Oh, great. I'll check that out for sure.
Yeah, and Jude, as always, it's always great to have you here. And I thought that this was a really great episode talking about maps and focusing on maps. And I'm glad you wrote the book because we wouldn't have the episode without you writing this book. So keep doing
Totally.
like the good work out there, man. This is really important stuff. Like, I think that literature and books, where people think they're going away, I think they're still very much a part of what humans need as part of their lives, and books are important. So, thanks for doing all that great work. And I can't imagine how long. It doesn't take you that long, actually. So I'm really impressed by your skills.
It does take a while. I just grind really hard.
You're incredible, man. And you could see there in chat, everyone, we got his links right there. So definitely give Brian some love. Follow him on Twitter. And I just want to mention before we go that we do have the retro gaming community, which Brian is definitely a part of and contributes to. So thanks, Brian, for joining and being a part of it.
Sure. Thanks for starting it.
We are now at 1,160 members, folks, and we are doing another physical game giveaway at 1,200 members. And it's pretty incredible that we only started this about a month ago. So I really, really appreciate all the support. If you haven't joined the community, I'm going to send a link in chat, but you could always check the pinned tweet on my personal Twitter, and all my links are below. Anything cool happening this weekend, Brian, before we go?
Oh, just want to finish recovering from being sick, so I'm going to try to take it easy, I think.
And thanks for coming on while you were sick, and showing,
it's all good.
Showing your lovely face. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Other than that, you all know where to find me. We are going to be back next Saturday with another guest. This is one of those months where we have a guest every weekend. So to end the month next week, we are having one more guest. Really excited. We'll be announcing that next week. Of course, you guys could find me all over the place. And I want to thank everyone on VOD and the YouTube. Thank you so much as well. Our YouTube is really growing, and it's really great to give people that can't make the live a chance to watch it. And remember, I always say this, we only get one shot at this, so be nice to people. And I'm Andy. That's Brian. We'll see you later. And thank you for watching another episode of Cafe BTW, a morning gaming podcast. Thank you all. See you later.